Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Adulting is Easy podcast, where we make adulting easier by making money easier. This is your host, Lauren, and I'm joined today by Sean, the wealth dad. Sean is a husband, father of two, and investor. He works a 9 to 5 and side hustles as well. Thanks for joining me, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I do want everybody to know that this episode is brought to us by Steadily Landlord Insurance. Steadily covers many kinds of properties, single family, multifamily, vacant, restorations, apartment buildings, condos, and manufactured, and even, of course, Airbnbs and VRBOs. If you rent property to others, support this podcast by clicking the link in the show notes and getting a quote today. So our goal for today is to make adulting easier for you, our listeners, by discussing a personal finance topic, since managing money is a big part of adulting. So today, Sean, we're going to talk about simple ways to invest. But before we get into that, can you tell us, how did you become so passionate about personal finance?
Yeah. So I've been asked this question a bunch, and I wish there was a cooler story. I wish I had some I got into some crazy debt or bought something stupid. I don't. I've honestly been, I don't want to say always good with money, but I kind of started as a blank slate, and I didn't really have a lot of bad decisions. I think and now that I've thought about it a bunch, I think I just kind of benefited from, I always had stability growing up in my life. I had, my two parents are still married. I had three older sisters. They were all, athletes all around the year. I was an athlete all year. They went to college. So I always had and my dad worked I always had working structure, sports structure, academic structure in my life. So I think I was just very fortunate to kind of be, the last bastion in my family to follow all of the examples. I wasn't anywhere close to the student as my sister. They were all like 4.0 students, really, really, really book smart. Not say I was bad, but I just wasn't at that level. But I at least, I knew what to do to get, to the next steps, and get ahead. And then my first job out of college, I was just really fortunate. I had a boss. I worked at a military base as a defense contractor, and it was just filled essentially with retired military personnel. And my boss specifically was retired Air Force. He was collecting, amazing benefits and now making, killer money on the side or on this job as like a manager of, whatever, our security team. And he just kind of pulled me aside one day and just stressed the importance of, hey, he was like, focus on your retirement first. Cause he knew I was fresh out of college. I didn't, I was literally just doing basic Excel stuff. It wasn't anything crazy. And that actually kind of got me to I almost was very close to going down the military route just because I was just surrounded by them. Up until I created the wealth that literally was the path I was going to go. I had my acceptance letter for Naval Officer Candidate School, was ready to go, but then, kind of went all in on the wealth dad side. But yeah, really I was just very fortunate to have structure in my life. I had a boss who told me to prioritize retirement. So then I just kind of took the leeway with that and read everything I could on money. And that just was pretty much the basis. And I've just been essentially, I would say the only thing that makes me above average, I guess, in money in the type of investing that I do for the long term is just I've just been extremely consistent with hitting singles and doubles for like 8 to 9 years now. And it's just compounded to an amount that's, way above the median level for me and my wife's age. So it's kind of pretty much where we got to where we are today.
A lot of personal finance and managing your own money is not making big mistakes, not digging a big hole. And you
Yep.
really can't understate, or you really can't overstate, I should say, the importance of that. If you start with a blank slate and then you get somebody pulling you aside and saying, hey, maybe look into retirement accounts. It doesn't even sound like that boss said, do this, do this, do this. It was
Correct.
more like, yeah, and then you had to go do your own research, and then you wanted to tell people about it. And that's
Yep.
how we got to where we are today.
Yep. He
Love it.
actually had me on the old school mindset. I think the only thing he did push, he just talked about his pension a bunch. And I knew those, even I knew at that time, I didn't know much about money, but I knew those were kind of a thing of the past. But that's kind of what pushed me to the military so much. I was like, oh, so I can get a pension, I can get a TSP,
Yep.
I can get all of that. But yeah, I just needed to hear the word retirement. And then fortunately, I was whatever sparked, and I just started reading because I also hate books. I don't read. I haven't read a book in like 2 years, probably, since I read all my money books. But that was just kind of something that clicked. And fortunately, it helped out a lot financially that was the topic, that I got decently excited enough to read about.
It is so helpful when money is sort of your hobby.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you said you're investing for the long term, what does that look like for you?
If you follow me online, if you're on, financial Twitter, if you're on social media, if you're on any type of social media that deals with, personal finance, I'm on the most boring side of it. I just invest in index funds. I get DMs all the time. Do you own individual stocks? Our portfolio is literally 100% index funds and ETFs. We own literally just 3 funds. And literally all we've done now I'm 31 now, so close to 9 years now, is literally just buy at minimum every 2 weeks, at most every week, for the past 9 years. And it's literally just been investing in those funds where I first started was just basic 401ks and Roth IRAs. And then I made a switch a couple years ago. I ran the numbers on our account statuses, and I saw that our total retirement accounts, when you put them together, and if we combined all of our retirement accounts, I did a projection to see what it would grow to by the time we're 59 and a half if we contributed $0 the rest of the way, if we literally just stopped contributing to retirement accounts. And I saw that our, total balances would surpass our inflation adjusted financial independence number by 59 and a half. So what that told me is, even adjusted for inflation, I used about a 3% rate. And you can argue if that's too small or too little, whatever the case may be. But that it came out ahead like hundreds of $1,000s more. So I knew at that point, our retirement accounts are likely in a pretty good spot. And we're not big spenders anyways. Like I said, pretty much my only hobbies are going to the gym, go on like movie dates with my wife, and literally that I'm not an extravagant spender. So I knew we were in good shape. So then I essentially just recommitted entirely, still with index funds, but just went heavy taxable brokerage. And this is an account that you can tap before 59 and a half without penalties. Your earnings, your distributed dividends, your capital gains, whatever the case may be, you'll have to report those every year on your taxes. But if you're a buy and hold investor like me, who's not really buying and selling too much, that tax liability is really not as big of a deal as a lot of people make it out to be. It's especially if you're making good money and your expenses are low, it's really not that burdensome of a tax bill. Maybe when it's a couple million, could be. I'm not at that point yet, but it's slowly growing there. But that's been our shift now at 31. So like pretty much the goal with that now, where we're at long-term investing, is by the time our 2 kids graduate high school, I'll be probably somewhere around 47. My wife will be like 45. Is to have that account to be at about 2.5 million, and that will be at the point where we can say we can either pay off the mortgage, we can live our life on our terms, but that's the point where we want to be like, hey, that's where we want to be financially independent and essentially do what we want to at that point. We're still really like comfortable in the jobs we are now. Like we don't have any urgency to leave, so that's kind of nice. So fortunately, we work in kind of positions where we work from home primarily, that there's not like a burdensome to leave quickly like a lot of people have. So we're in a pretty good spot right now.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So we had a similar thing where we realized that we were like maxing out our 401ks and maxing out our Roth IRAs for a few years in our early 20s. And then it doesn't take much. You do that math, you're like, oh, guess we're done. And actually, yeah. I think looking back, I might have over contributed. We might have over contributed to our 401ks a bit and should have just been maxing the match. I sort of wish I could go back and take that difference and put it into the brokerage.
And I'll give credit, Nick Majuli, who just wrote Just Keep Buying. That was actually the last book I've read. He is the only kind of personal finance author I've seen touch on this topic. He actually has like a 3-page bit on, are you contributing too much to your 401k? Most people say, just do it, take the tax, takes the tax deduction pre-tax. It's the best way to maximize every single dollar to grow every single dollar. But that might not necessarily line up with what your actual life goals are. And as you said, if you stockpile enough of it in your 20s and 30s, if you actually run the projections, you'd be surprised what compounding will do for those accounts, just by itself without you contributing any extra dollars. I will add, though, that we just contribute up to the match and we max out our Roth IRA. So we haven't stopped completely. Yeah. It's just a much reduced amount from what it used to be.
No, same with us. Totally. We're on the same page. Can you explain to people, in case they don't know, what that means to invest in index funds and ETFs?
Yeah. So you have what's called a stock, and that's just a piece of ownership in a company. If you buy a stock in Apple, you are you're an owner in Apple. You benefit from the growth of the company. You get a share of the dividends of the company. You are an owner of the company. With an index fund, you don't buy individual stocks as themselves. You essentially buy all of them. So the most basic example is an S&P 500 index fund. Instead of buying like Apple, Home Depot, Disney, whatever, you buy you buy the index and it'll buy you all the 500 stocks at once. So you're buying the bucket that holds all the stocks versus buying the individual stuff in the bucket itself. So you just buy the bucket and it's going to hold everything for you. And over the aggregate, over time, for the long-term investor, an index fund, and I'm referencing this as like an S&P 500 index fund or a total stock market index fund, has returned investors on average about like 10% a year, including reinvested dividends for like the past 100 years. You're not going to get rich off of just a 10% return, in the short term. So if you're trying to get rich with, if you're like a 25-year-old, 32-year-old, and you're like, hey, I'm trying to, retire in 5 years, or in 10 years, you're likely not going to do that off 10% return or 8 to 10% returns in an index fund because compounding is not going to work for you that quickly. Unless you're making a ridiculous amount of money and you're putting in multiple six figures a year, then maybe. But when you invest in index funds, you're essentially making an agreement that, I'm not touching this money for another likely 25 years at the minimum. So, if you're a 25-year-old, you're buying an index fund, and I just gave you the example. The earliest I plan to touch it is about 47. So I've been investing since 22. So you can do the math right there. That's 25 years right there. But this is a very long-term approach. But fortunately, it's kind of like with the adage, you just need to get rich once. This is you can't guarantee what future returns are going to be. But if we're basing off of, historically, and people who have accumulated mass, amounts of wealth, a couple $1 million in an index fund, it's generally been a pretty safe long-term means of being able to live off of. It'll produce you a healthy enough dividend. Like I said, if you have a couple million in there and a 3% yield, that might even get you like close to $90,000 to $100,000 plus a year. And if they're in Roth retirement accounts, it's tax-free. So this is a very long-term approach. If you're trying to get rich in 5 years, I don't want to say go bet stocks, but you're probably best off doing something similar to you, where you kind of went the real estate route or Airbnb route, something that immediately provides you income to, supplant the income that you currently have right now. But that's kind of the long-term approach with index funds.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And just wanted to note for people, the vast majority, I'm probably 99.9%. I mean, don't beat the market when they pick individual stocks. So not only is it a good idea to try to it's totally acceptable and actually a good idea to get the 10% of the stock market. If you try to get more than that, you're actually likely to go broke.
Correct. And where you started this whole conversation is what you don't want to do is miss, a lot of successful investors, they want to limit their downside a lot. And where I still get DMs from a lot of young investors, and where they really got crushed was the COVID spike back up when meme stocks and individual stocks were just going like crazy, but then they eventually crashed back down. And you had a lot of I don't want to just say young investors, just novice investors. These could even be people in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. They're just new to the market. But if that's kind of the strategy you want to start with, the danger is, almost the worst thing you can have happen to you as an investor is strike big quickly on an individual investment because you think you're actually talented or have some superior intellect, when the reality is 98% chance it was luck, probably even 99.9%. But that gives you an inflated ego, and if you waste too many years with that ego, eventually that house of cards is going to collapse. And if you have an instance where your portfolio falls 50 to 90%, you're screwed in two routes. One, financially, you're screwed. Like, it takes a massive amount of return to recover a portfolio like that. And then the second part is, and what really screws people is they just think it's a scam after that. So they never return to the stock market, where if they were just, at least put 90% of their money in index funds and use maybe the other 5 to 10% in individual plays, if they had the gambling streak, they wouldn't have had that massive downturn, and they wouldn't have to recoup all of that, principle and compounding that they've built up over those past 10 years.
Yeah, I like that. I exactly recommend that to people as well. I think that that's totally fair. If you have the 5 to 10% of your portfolio that you're quote unquote gambling with or speculating with or trading with, that's fine. But just recognize that, the odds are you're not going to be that 1 in a billion person that can time the stock market perfectly over and over and over into perpetuity.
Correct. And the best part too is you don't need to be to get rich. I think
No,
it's a big problem. It's just we're naturally egotistical kind of as humans, and we think we're smarter than we are. We think we're better than we are, and we think we need to be above something. But with money, and specifically the stock market, you can be completely average and still be a multimillionaire. Hell, you can even be a decamillionaire. There's tons of decamillionaires who just have their money in Vanguard, Fidelity, and Schwab index funds. They had a great career, or they had a good business, but they just literally shoveled their money in that. And they've got a $10 million portfolio, with a 3% yield, giving them 300 grand a year. But
absolutely.
they were just they were doing an average approach that gave them above average, returns over the long term.
Totally, totally. And I have chosen real estate as a method for retiring early because you get those cash flows much more quickly. It's significantly more active, especially when we're talking about the Airbnb. So there's a huge cost to that. But I do want to say about 40% of our net worth is in stocks, but particularly index funds as well.
Mm.
So we've got a pretty good chunk in there.
Yeah.
What are the three funds you're in?
So the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund is the majority of our portfolio.
Me too.
We have, and I'll even give you the asset. It's a fairly aggressive. I mean, I'm 31, so I don't hold any bonds. We're 100% stocks. So upfront, we're 100% stocks. 50% right now is in VT-SAX, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. It owns the entire United States stock market. That's over like 4,000 stocks. So once again, going back to the concept of the bucket, I don't own individual stocks. I own this one index fund. And within that index fund owns over 4,000 individual US companies. The next one, our next highest one, is 30%, and that's QQQM. That's the NASDAQ 100. You could probably argue that's way too much allocated to that. But once again, all of our accounts, even with over the long term, once again, even with like a reduced rate of return, we're still in really good shape. So we also have ample amounts of cash flow and minimum expenses. So we have the risk tolerance to be able to, stomach this. Last year when the NASDAQ was down like 35%, I was just buying like crazy. It wasn't a big deal to me then. So 30% is in the NASDAQ 100 ETF, that's QQQM. And then 20% is in the Vanguard Total International Stock Market Index Fund. And that includes both developed and emerging economies. So pretty much every, stock market outside of the United States, that is what that covers. And that's our lowest, holding of about 20%. It used to be 30%, but we dwindled that down when we added QQM about 2 years ago, and just kind of reallocated more to QQQM.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that anybody should be doing before they start buying index funds?
Yeah, reading about money. You can always set up an automatic contribution into, an S&P 500 index fund, but you're going to go the furthest you can financially by at least understanding at a very basic level what it is you're investing in, why you're investing in it, and what the purpose is of it. And this doesn't have to be like crazy research. You can literally just read 2 books. Two of the easiest ones I read were, what is it? The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by Jack Bogle. It's a tiny book, tiny book. Or what's another good one? The one I mentioned from Nick Majuli, Just Keep Buying. Boglehead's Guide to Investing. Just go to Amazon and just type in top personal finance investing books, and you're going to find 1 to 2 of them there. Just read them. Don't drag your feet on that. Try to actually read them in a fairly quick time. Take a couple months and read them and understand it. But that's really what you want to get to, because you want to have the base understanding, and then you can then set the investing step up. But then what's really important, and I'm not going to go into the budgeting side, but it's kind of lining all your ducks up. You want to start, really looking, because once you read about investing, you're going to be way more conscious about, your personal, balance sheet and your household. That it's just naturally going to come, because you're going to start thinking, how much money can I save here? How much can I invest there to get those crazy, $1 million, $2 million amounts? So you're going to be way more conscious on your spending. You're going to be way more conscious on your debt. You're going to be way more conscious on your monthly payments towards that debt. And you're going to start thinking, is this some stuff I should get out of? Is it credit card debt? Is it a card debt? Do I need to go back down? So if I had to literally just, start from scratch, read 1 to 2 books on personal finance, go to Amazon, just type it in, be way more conscious on your balance sheet so you can actually have the money to invest. And then you're going to be in good shape to essentially rock and roll. That's literally all I did. I read like 10 to 20 books on personal finance. We trimmed every expense we did not need. We didn't really, we didn't reduce our lifestyle. We just literally took out all that didn't matter. Don't have car debt. The only expenses we have now are kid related, or, if we want a vacation or not, but now everything just gets invested. But it's really all the upfront work is you reading, fixing your balance sheet at home. And then it just naturally comes into place where you're just investing every 2 weeks, and you just got to be patient for literally years to decades to get those results.
Yep, I love that. I mean, the main person standing in the way of you becoming wealthy through long-term investing is you. It's your psychology. So, The Psychology Money is another great book. The Simple Path to Wealth is an awesome one as well. I definitely love those. I love how you're like, I read 10 to 20, but I think 1 to 2 is enough for you guys.
Well, like, look, if this is, it's more answering the question of how many is enough to get started.
Right.
I feel like if you just read 1 to 2, and I'm saying this now because once you read 1 to 2 of them, the other 10 to 20 say the same thing, just with a different spin by the author. So you're not learning anything different. You're just getting, I only read 10 to 20 because I was just, a junkie at the time and just loved hearing the same message, again and again and again. But
it is like a mindset. It's like a mindset shift. My husband's like, "Are you reading another personal finance book?" I'm like, "Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am." And I can tell that I'm like, because I also am getting to the point where I think I'm getting really good per person that I'm talking to and recommending a specific book for them because I've read them all.
Yep. That's actually a good point. Yeah.
Like I have certain ones that I would recommend to like differently to my dad than like my sister, for example.
Yeah, 100%.
So I noticed on your Twitter timeline, at least, you talk a lot about investing for your kids. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate. Well, unfortunate and fortunate. I had one of the dopest aunts in the world. But unfortunately, she passed away of breast cancer when I was 18. So we were in the process of setting up, FAFSA to get my student loans going. But little did we know, she never had kids. I don't think she was married. She was an awesome aunt, but I didn't know much about like that's, her marital side or whatever. But I got my mom was in the car one day and she was like, she's leaving each and one of like the nieces and nephews, which was a decent amount of us. There was like 11 to 15 of us. And like her 4 siblings, like the nieces and nephews were getting $40,000 each. And that was literally the amount to pay for a 4-year in-state college. So I was, like I said, I don't want to say fortunate because I would have traded it all back in a second to not have that, $40,000. But that got me essentially to not have student loans. I did immediately, as a high five to no student loans, then, went and bought a $25,000 car on a $35,000 salary, when I first got out. So I did have a debt, kind of example to at least learn off of.
Right.
But I knew how awesome and how much of a leg up it was not to have that, whatever that payment would have been, $300 to $600 a month payment attached to me. Cause I did not make a lot of $35,000. And even in 2014, when I was making it, was not a lot of money. Yeah. So I knew how much of a leg up it was. And I know, where college costs are going now. What really actually freaks me the F out for my kids, not freaks. I don't freak out really over anything. But like if there was like a concern I had is like when they eventually become adults, like homes are going to be $1 million. Yeah. That's just what the price is going to be. They're already, I think the median price is about 375 to 400. I got to see the number range, but that's where
I think
is.
I think it's about 4. Yeah.
If you assume like a 5%, increase year over year, it's in the ballpark of people are going to need like $200,000 down payments for a 20%. And even that, like, just think of an 800,000, like that's what scares me the most financially for a young kid, becoming an adult for. It's not necessarily college. I can help them finagle college, even though that's what we invest in now is 529s because of that new 529 change. But there's ways, I can help him go almost the route that I was going to go, the military route. Naval academies do it for free. They'll also pay you scholarship. So I'm not worried about that. But the real estate side is what really, I really want to get them assistance for. So if I can do anything to put them in a position where, I can take one burden off of them, and the burden that I'm taking off now with the 529s is school. So they won't have the student loans. And they also have UTMAs. It's not going to be a crazy amount, but it'll be, I don't know, somewhere probably between 40 to $80,000 that they'll get as well on top of that. I haven't seen the projections like what they'd be in like 16 to 18 years. But it's just the world is just stupid expensive. I mean, we see it now. You see it with your real estate deals just as such for right now. And we're good income earners. I would say you and me. And it is not as easy for people who make good money.
Right.
So that's kind of where I feel like even now, like people who young people specifically, it's almost next to impossible for them to get any leg up unless they're making ridiculous amounts of money. Like if they're super focused, those people will always be fine. But for the average person who's making like $60,000 as like a teacher or like some analyst or bank, whatever it is, there's nothing they can really do unless they have massive financial support from their family. They're not gonna be able to buy a house. They can't pay for weddings. They can't pay for cars because everything's just too damn expensive. So when I picture what that's going to be in 16 years, that's where like we have the discretionary income. Me and my wife are going to be fine 10 times over. Now, how can we help them to not, because I'm not a person who thinks their, kid has to legit get it out the mud every step of the way. I don't think kids have to do that. I think I can teach them an equal balance, like almost like I had when I was growing up. But I do believe most kids, if they want to at least, live a decent quality of life, at least to the standards that I have, ideally you want your kids to live a better quality of life than you do. I feel like they're going to need that support just because of how expensive things are going to be in 16 years.
Right. I do think now, I mean, $400,000. I mean, you need $100,000 down. My first house in 2012 was just over $100,000. I mean, that's a pretty short amount of time for that big of a jump. And Florida's gone up, significantly more than that. And wages haven't gone up that much. So, I'm always a proponent of, do the FHA, get a small multifamily, get roommates, do what you need to do. And that works now. But it's a solid point. My nephew is 1 and my niece is 2. And I think about them all the time. Semi lucky for them. I don't have kids. So that might work out for them someday as well. And my dad has funded their, I think, just prepaid. I think prepaid. Something. I don't know if it's prepaid or if he just put it in accounts or it's 529. I can't remember what he said he did. Yeah. But they have a little bit too. But I think you're right. That's sort of the philosophy on my end. I think it's probably a delicate balance, though. Maybe you would have something more to say about this since you have children, but giving them a leg up without making them like entitled.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have like a 10-point bullet plan of how I'm going to do it. I do have some general structures of what my parents did, because I always wonder how my parents did not go to college. Like I said, my dad worked at like night shifts at UPS. He worked at, cigar stores, wines, like nothing crazy. My mom did daycare, but they did get 4 kids through like college, and all of us in our own ways, financially, career-wise, business-wise, have, in my book, succeeded past like the average person. Sure. So it's always like, I have a good reference point of what we did as kids. So I'm going to implement same things. I think doing sports all year round was very critical for all me and my 4 sisters. This is actually one of the things I'm going to do, or that I think that we're going to do. And it's not a big deal to me, but I wonder how it's going to play with the wife. We haven't talked about it much. I have no issue with where we live. We live in an older townhome. But financially, we can likely upgrade to a much, bigger home, much nicer home. But one of my ways that I'm thinking about is maybe not doing that, staying in that, essentially this home until they graduate, so they don't necessarily know of the wealth. Right. All they'll see me doing is work, gym, we'll go out, eat maybe one or 2 times. I don't know. It'll be very middle class, maybe even borderline, middle lower class, the type of lifestyle. They will not see the wealth. Our cars they're paid off. They're not fancy. So they physically will not see, a 3,500 square foot home potentially. Right. Whatever. I have no idea what nice cars. I can't give you a car name, but they're not going to see fancy cars out the window. So they're not going to be like, oh, mom and dad are loaded, we're going to the Bahamas, every other, 3 months. So that's one way I've thought about it. We'll see how we implement it. And then, maybe we'll have like the fun surprise when they're 21, like, hey, just kidding. We're actually, multimillionaires. We're going to move to a nice house now, but at least you guys now I'm not worried about because you have your head on straight. But that's one
Yeah,
I've
I
kind of
like
thought about
it.
it.
I like it. That's very Millionaire Next Door,
Yeah.
right? Speaking, there's another book. I'm gonna have
Yep.
to hold on.
Great
I'm gonna
book.
write that down. Put
Because we
that
do eventually plan to
bookmarks.
move to like like we have a desire to go to Southern Florida, get a pretty nice house on like a water channel or something. But that's never going to happen until they are graduate. That's going to be a me and her thing.
Yeah. Yeah, come on down.
Yeah.
I hope they fix the insurance problem before you guys are down here. Or maybe
Yeah.
you'll pay cash so that you won't even
Yeah.
need it. Um, yeah, good. I love that. I always like asking people about kid stuff because
Mhm.
I can't, listeners are never going to get that from me, in all
Also, good.
likelihood.
One reason I want to do it too is they blow a house up. So I know
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't like a lot of stuff in my house anyways. My wife is the ass opposite. So kids bring a lot of stuff and they jack up a lot of stuff. So if we had a nice like big house, single family home, brand new, I know I would get annoyed in 2 seconds with any type of scuff. And that's just how I am. So kind of I don't want to, it's not a rundown. I mean, we upkeep it pretty well, but
Yeah.
like it's easier knowing that like this is just like a starter home. Like we're going to rip the Band-Aid off this eventually. So it's easier. They can kind of tear this up as much as they want to. And I'm not going to get too angry at them.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And that's 100% how I would be.
Yeah.
Every house I live in is a future rental because I'm like, I'm just going to leave and keep it. So,
Yep. Yep.
so Sean, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Let me think. We talked index funds. We talked just basic personal finance. We talked kids. I can probably talk about side hustling a little bit. So I wrote 2 ebooks. I used to sell a decent amount of it, like a couple $1,000s a month for probably a good year and a half. Like it was a good streak of about $4,000 to $5,000 a month is what I would make off of it on top of my income. So it kind of goes to the fact where I was going to where everything is just getting more expensive. And you were talking kind of about house hacking in a way, for young kids to get, or just anybody to get into real estate. What I will say is, and this is not necessarily side hustling, but if you do, this is for anyone of your listeners listening, how to essentially get ahead in today's world that's extremely expensive and that's going to keep getting more expensive is you're going to have to find out, you have 2 ways to do this: cutting expenses or making more money. This is entirely this. Fortunately, this is a math equation. This is not. This isn't a ridiculous calculus. You need to increase your disposable income, which is the difference between how much money you make and how much money you spend. So you're going to have to figure out how much you're willing to sacrifice on the expense side and in the lifestyle side. If you really want to get ahead, are you willing to, go the route you said, get a FHA or whatever loan, put 3% down and have 3 roommates for a year or 2? Are you willing to sell your Tesla and go down to whatever Toyota Corolla from 2010? If you're not willing to do that, then you've got to do it on the income side. Fortunately, I had a piece of knowledge that was I don't want to call it in demand at the time, but it was in demand for at least the people following me at the time. And it made me a decent amount of money. They've made a little over 6 figures. I've invested in all, but that was another way for me to increase our, wealth building on that side. So really, yeah, I would just say you're going to have to, it's going to suck if you're starting from scratch. Or even if you have some, but just know that if you do want to get ahead, every one of us who have gotten ahead, well, I don't want to say every one of us, there are, people who get inheritance, but for the large majority of us, anyone who has gotten ahead will tell you it takes, at minimum, 2 to 5 years of like legit different type of living than the average person. Like
Absolutely.
we are all doing stuff that the average person is unwilling to do. We are living in smaller homes. We're living with roommates. I moved in with my parents for a year and a half with my wife to save up for the down payment on our home. I was laughed at like crazy. I was made fun of in group chats with friends at times, but now I have a $1,500 mortgage where the average mortgage, in our area now is like double that. And the rent
Absolutely.
is like double that. So
Yep.
now we're sitting really pretty, but we were willing to sacrifice for 2 years to do that. It wasn't as fun in the time. Even my wife was pregnant, but we saw the longer vision. And now, sacrifice those 2 years for the rest of our life now, for the next 50, 60 years. We don't ever have to do it again. So you're going to have to, face the point, look in the mirror to see how aggressive you're willing to go with this. And if you're not willing to drastically change your lifestyle, then you're likely not going to get the results that you want. That's just the reality. So you're just gonna have to really focus on what are you willing to sacrifice and what are you willing to do to get to that next step.
That's a great ad, Sean. And something that I often say and how I think about it, let's say you're making $80,000. Go live like somebody who normally does who makes 60.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like somebody is making less than you and just living.
Correct.
Just, I don't know, LARP, live action role play it, like pretend
Yep.
you make 60. Like somebody out there is doing it. So that's kind of what I say to people. And yeah, is it a little uncomfortable? Sure. But I mean, what if you were making 60?
Correct.
Right? Then you have to look like you're making 40. You're doing better than that. So
correct.
That's how I feel.
And if you're nervous or worried that, people who you think like you, or you're worried about their impression of you, I can almost guarantee you a few of them, once you get on track, and if they find out that you are doing well financially, some of them will ask how you do it. And then they'll be like, damn, you were right. So you will eventually get the validation, at least from one person, if they give it to you. So don't ever take it, bad in the moment.
No, they, yeah. And I think the number's right. I think
like
2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell people how to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's at The Wealth Dad. That's literally how it's spelled, The Wealth Dad. I'm not on it as much as I used to be, but I'm on it. Like I'll post a couple times a day. I'm not any like actively trying to grow it like I used to, but that's where you can find me.
Absolutely. And everybody can follow me on Twitter at Adulting is Easy, YouTube at Adulting is Easy. Actually, if you want to see this interview, it is posted there as well. If you are on audio, I am on Instagram at Adulting is Easy, real email, realadultingiseasy@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Hopefully, Sean and I have made adulting a little easier for you.